I just bought the onboarding that came with the product. And I had that product work with my team to go through onboarding and to like help guide us through setting it up. Worst decision ever. If I could go back and do that again, I would have paid the $20K or whatever that the partners of that company were doing, because the amount of knowledge that that group had that I just was too stingy and didn't want to spend the money on, if I'm being honest, was probably enough to have saved my butt and kept us on that product for a long time to run our company.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. John, thanks again so much for joining us on the RevOps Champions podcast today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It was so good to see you a few weeks ago in Boston, like for our annual pilgrimage. It's always fun to see you. You're such a good human.
Yeah, I think we ran into each other every time I was eating. As you found me when I was at the food courts or the food trucks, and
yeah, which of course means that I was at the food trucks too. Yeah, we got to share a good lunch over a high top, which was fun.
I know they're hard to come by. You just kind of stalk people until they leave. But I saw you there, so I just went over and shared a table with you.
Yeah. Which was great.
I don't know if I would do it to just any random person. I might intimidate someone.
Right. It's all, you're such an intimidating guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, great to see you, John. And, having a guest like you who is essentially a colleague in the same ecosystem, I like to sort of change up how we discuss the topics that we typically discuss on the show, because I believe that, I can learn a lot from you in how you approach technology implementations, and hopefully that the folks listening will learn something from that conversation too. If I have a client or someone who's not a HubSpot partner, in other words, they're running a business that in most cases uses a CRM, more specifically the HubSpot CRM, it's a little different because they're the ones trying to figure out what we're trying to help them figure out do, right? I'd like to sort of, if you think back to some of the biggest implementations you've done, that so the ultimate measure of a successful implementation of a CRM or an ERP or any kind of technology that has a big impact on the business and therefore the people working in that business, the ultimate measure is the adoption of that team of that technology, right? So if you think back to some of the biggest implementations that you've done, what are the most sort of common themes that you see in those teams? And again, if it's a bigger implementation, it's going to be a bigger team. What are the themes that lead to the most successful adoption of new technology?
All right. So the way I always look at this, whenever we're going to do an implementation, especially if it's more than just like, sometimes we have one or two people from the company that we're working with, and usually those go quite swimmingly. And then sometimes we have, one or two champions in the company, and then we've got a team of 50 people that we've got to onboard and train. My take on this is I always want to find there's always a roadblock. Someone's always going to hate what you're doing, because somebody has to. So there's always at least like that one person who is just not going to accept anything because they just don't want to. And we all know who those people are. We've all worked with them. They're probably in our families. They're in everything we do. There's that kind of a person. And it's just part of life. And so one of the ways to address something challenging when you're doing an adoption of a new CRM or anything, I always like to find who that person is. And I try and isolate them one-on-one and talk specifically as early in the process as I can about platform agnostic. Like, just talk to me about what would be just awesome for you. Tell me, like, how can I make something, regardless of what it is, regardless of what tools, that is really a solid solution? What would you love to see if you could make a magic wand happen? And then you usually get them on your side at that point. And that has been one of the best ways. We've seen it time and time again, where we're doing an implementation or we have a whole team kind of sitting around a kickoff, and I don't even know why we bought this in the first place. And now you're on the defensive and you have to explain it, and you're trying to do a workshop to strategize. So that adoption piece, the more one-to-one you can be with as many people, that's the best. Great example of this. We're doing this right now. We're building a really cool vendor portal for a company, and it's tied specifically to deal stages. So I, as a vendor of this company's product, I can log in, I can see all the orders I'm making, I can see the status of those orders and see what's happening. They're a large manufacturing company. But on the back end, as I'm moving things in the deal stages and updating contact or deal properties, it's updating on the front end for them. The kicker is everyone's happy, customers happy with it, the users of HubSpot are happy with it, but there's a logistics person who is not in HubSpot, or she is now, but she didn't really like HubSpot. And so we realized really quickly that she's been in this position for 25 years and she's done things her way in this position, the one person in the company for 25 years. So you don't go to her and tell her how she's going to do her job, because you're barking up the wrong tree.
Yeah.
So, but bringing her into the mix and saying, hey, what do you really not like about how this is affecting your job? Like, what do you really not like about where are the roadblocks for you? And then what would you like to see in a perfect scenario? And we design around that. Now she's on my team.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, to your point, of course, that's such a critical piece of having adoption happen across the organization, because as long as you have that one blocker, that one person who is the blocker, that can really jeopardize the long-term adoption of whatever technology it is.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing this becomes more complex, right, as you work with larger and larger organizations. But at the same time, headcount is often celebrated by growing companies. But of course, we also know that headcount also is what adds challenges. And the theme of this show is why do some companies or businesses or teams scale better or more effectively than others, right? So if a company has all this, that they have access to the same resources, they have a similar headcount, whether they use it or not, they have access to the same technology because the technology is available in the public market. What is it that again, larger organizations can do or do successfully, so that they can successfully improve their processes and technology as the headcount grows? Or what happens if they don't?
Yeah, the headcount thing is always conundrum to me, because it's even in my own business, like at some point, a new headcount, adding that extra person now means we have this entirely new set of problems to have to solve for. And these, whatever tools you're using, your process internally, if I added, a few more people to my team, I now have to create an entirely new set of management people to just make sure that we have divisions and teams. So it's not taken lightly that, you have to really make sure that whatever you're implementing, tools, process, strategy, culture, that it is built to scale, whether it's scaled with a new person being added and can replicate, scale within adding another level above that to understand now, what does it look like? What do I need to see amongst all these people? But then also, what happens if that person gets hit by a bus and is no longer here, and all the knowledge, all the information lives in that person's seat and it's no longer there? That's that's a really challenging part of this. And so I'm kind of just rambling at this point, Brendon. Can you revisit the question? Where we go from here?
Yeah, no, but well, actually, what I like what you really said. The question was specifically around, technology and processes and data. But you actually started talking about it's the same process, whether you're talking about technology, data, or process, as it is about strategy and culture. That's a really interesting thought that I wasn't expecting you to go to. But so talk me through that. So a growing company with they're adding people. So what you were saying is that whether you're trying to evolve your processes, or you're trying to improve your KPIs or data, or you're trying to incorporate new technology, or you're actually just trying to make sure that your strategy and culture are keeping up with where the organization is going. Are you saying you kind of see that all through the same lens?
Yeah. So if you've got to get me to buy into a new team, we got to put the human element back into it, because if you're going to get me to buy into a new team and to be a part of something, and I have two options. One of them is a company that has everything beautifully built. I could sit in and I can see everything perfect, all the automations there, but it's kind of a crappy place to work. There's not a lot of culture. I don't mean culture as in something silly, but it's not fun to work there. I don't feel like I'm a part of the team. I don't feel like my voice is heard. I'm not really as interested in going there. I'd much rather go to the second company, which might be, they probably don't have everything all worked out yet, but it's a really great place to be. And we're all kind of growing in that same direction. That is going to be a lot more appealing to me. So ideally, you don't have one without the other. You want the really great systems and process, and you want a place that the strategies there, that you feel heard, you feel like you're a part of a team. And so what I would think through that is, we always talk about like getting everybody to row in the same direction. And that is probably the biggest priority for me, is that I want us all as a team. Like my team is not going to hit any goals and accomplish what I hope that we do if we aren't all rowing in that same direction, me included. The tools, the systems, the automations are just there to like basically lift that up and accentuate that and make it easier. It's not the other way around.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. So essentially what you're talking about is alignment, right? And no one's going to hold me to this, but it's one of the things that comes up most frequently on the show is really comes down to whatever people are calling it. It comes down to alignment, to the point where I've wondered, do we change the name of this show to the Alignment Champions versus the RevOps Champions?
That's a good point.
But because ultimately, if you think about RevOps, that's what RevOps is. It's all about alignment. Mm-hmm. It's about aligning marketing, sales, and service, and about aligning people, process, data, and technology. It is about alignment, and of course, alignment just, I guess, is more easily understood. But of course, we're speaking specifically about go-to-market teams or revenue teams, which is why RevOps as a term exists.
Absolutely.
So I think everybody, and it sounds like you are in full agreement based on what you've already shared. The people, culture, strategy, vision, that is just like table stakes, right? If that's not happening, then we would probably prefer companies not reach out to us and say, John, Brendon, can you help us implement the HubSpot CRM or whatever technology it is that they need? Because we know that technology is going to accentuate, to your previous point, it's going to accentuate what they're currently doing. So if what they're currently doing is not great, it's going to get less great. And if they're doing something really amazing, it's going to become more amazing, because that's what technology does, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So the question really is so we've realized over the last 5 or 6 years that ultimately, data and technology can either be an asset or a liability. So how do you see these two areas best managed? Business leaders or companies stay on the right side, on the positive side, versus their tech or their data being a liability?
That's a good question, because I probably would have just elaborated on the things that I had just said about, like, all the data in the world can help your job. It can help you do amazing things, but there is too much data. Like there's a point where you have way too much, and it makes you spend too much time doing things that you don't necessarily need to be doing. That's one of the beautiful things about AI, and it's a disaster about AI, and because it can completely overrun what you're trying to do to the point of where it's no longer functional. So perfect example. A few nights ago, I love like data analysis. It's such a nerdy thing. I pulled all of my customer list of the last 14 years from my company, because they're all in my portal, my CRM. I exported them and I anonymized it, so I don't have any names. I don't have any, personal information. And then I imported that into ChatGPT. And I started running really crazy analyses. And the first 20 minutes, I was geeking out. It was so cool. I saved all kinds of stuff into a drive. I'm like, I cannot wait to show our team when we start to analyze, as our quarterly meeting was coming up. Who we want to work with? What are the top 20 clients that we want to really focus on, and just replicate those?
Yeah.
And lo and behold, as time went on, it's 1 a.m, and I'm still doing this, and I'm enjoying myself doing it. But probably the first 20 to 30 minutes of me doing that was all I needed to do. Granted, I was just goofing off and having a good time.
Yeah.
But that definitely is a really good example of that too much data. If I would have done that during the day and then I would have left my office at that point in time, I would have been really mad at myself that I spent my afternoon analyzing this much data for nothing. I could chalk it up to a learning experience of okay, I probably learned a lot of like prompts and not. So, I could probably find the value in it. But there's a point when data, tools, all these different things can give us way too much that is no longer useful. And so
Absolutely. Yeah.
versus it being really helpful. And so finding that balance is hard. And I do think on the tool side, it can also be a very similar situation to where, this tool solves this problem, this tool solves this problem. Okay, we could consolidate and put it all, like we can integrate all of these into HubSpot. Now we have all this information in HubSpot, but at the end of the day, if no one knows what to do with it and no one looks at it, and the person who did all of that left the company, why did we just spend all this time, all this money? Why did we do that? Because it's no longer useful to anyone.
Well, I would say just on your being up until 1 a.m. geeking out with ChatGPT, which I can see myself doing as well, actually. To me, the learning there for folks like you and I is realizing that, in fact, this is not going to take 6 or 7 hours like it did before. You can do this exercise in 20 or 30 minutes and then realize that you're actually done. I mean, to me, that's the learning. So I tend to use Claude a little more than ChatGPT, but I know the latest 4.0 version of ChatGPT is pretty amazing. So I'll probably start using that more again.
Have you played much with Copilot yet in HubSpot? It's way better than what ChatSpot used to be. I've only spent a little bit of time on it, but it's really great for just quick reports, asking questions of what's in your portal. I've been really impressed with it.
Yeah, we were actually in our team meeting this morning, we were talking about, and there were a few people who shared like use cases that they were using it for this week, and it was wow, that's cool.
It's actually, I'm glad you said that, because company show and tell is really fun to do. And we've done stuff in the past. I'm going to bring that back, our company meeting next week, because we've done stuff in the past where we're like, think of like the weirdest thing you've ever done in HubSpot for a client. And then like, let's talk about it and whoever wins gets like something fun.
Right.
So everybody had to come with something odd. And there was some weird stuff that people were like, why would you even have to do that in HubSpot?
Yeah. So every Thursday morning we do what's called Dynamico Download, where we get everybody in, whether they're in person or on Zoom, for a quick half hour. It's a very specific agenda that we have, and it's really focused on all the positive things that are happening. And the last 5 minutes, one person on the team, so we have a schedule for the next 6-8 weeks, so everybody knows, and everyone kind of rotates through, and we do what we call like sort of a HubSpot education segment, because this HubSpot is rolling out new functionality so frequently, but it's really important for us, and we find this works really well. Is our team, whoever's doing the HubSpot sort of highlight for that week, they'll highlight a tool that they've started using recently and share some use cases, which is super helpful. And really, I mean, it takes them probably 15 to 30 minutes to prepare for it, but it takes 5 minutes for them to share the value, and then people can go, oh wow, that's really cool, I'm going to start using that.
Absolutely, that's a great idea. I'm going to steal that. Maybe can I come to your Dynamico download?
Absolutely.
Okay, I might come. That sounds fun.
Cool. We'll have you as a guest.
You should take all of those last 5 minutes and combine them into a little thing for your team.
Yes. Yeah, you're right.
Into like a video. Here's all the great stuff. Shoot, I might do that. We try and do like client updates of like, here's fun stuff we've learned lately that we want to share with you. That's a really, really great way of, trying to combine that.
Right. But to your point, I mean, no surprises for the last few weeks. It's all been around, Breeze and AI, right? So it's again, how do we pace ourselves, knowing that AI is going to completely change our world and everybody else around us, our clients and friends, family, etc. We have to be pragmatic about how we introduce it into the business so that it's not overwhelming, because it can very quickly become overwhelming. But by using specific bite-sized use cases where we go, oh my gosh, this is going to be really useful for us, and these are the types of clients that it could also be really useful for, so we're going to share that with them, kind of thing. So that seems to be working really well.
Can I share a horror story with you that just happened because of this stuff like a week ago? This is like stuff I should probably not share on a podcast, but that's okay. All the stuff, like HubSpot changes the name to Breeze.
Yeah.
And I didn't watch video. So as a HubSpot partner, we get like access to like, hey, here's the announcements, just so you're aware, and you're under NDA. You don't share it until the date that it's really okay. Yeah. And so the week before was just absolute chaos in my house. I got 4 kids starting school. It's like people are sick. We've got hockey practices. It's just nuts, just absolute chaos.
I get it.
Don't even know if we slept. So I didn't watch the update. I was like, I'll watch it on the plane, but I didn't watch it on the plane. And so we go there and I'm hearing these updates for the first time. My team's looking at me like, why are you like, you don't know about this? And I'm like, this is great. This is awesome. And so I'm getting the download and all that. So then I come home and I remember all the things. I don't remember that they called it Breeze though. And so I get on a sales call and it's with this large event planning company. And they're doing this really fantastic. They already know a lot about HubSpot. And I'm like, this is like, I'm going to knock this out of the park. Like, I'm a good salesman. I know how to talk about HubSpot. I know that like we're going to get into problems. And they start asking me about Breeze. And I'm like, what is that? And they were like, John. I'm like, what? What is Breeze? And they're like, well, it's the HubSpot, intelligence AI stuff. And I'm like, yeah, it is. Yeah. I know all about it, of course. So I didn't win that deal. We'll say that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It takes some getting used to, of course. But I mean, HubSpot did an incredible job of, introducing essentially their new suite of AI tools around as Breeze, because I mean, you can see it. It's cross-functional completely, but you can also see how, I mean, there's already 3 different, there's Breeze Copilot, there's Breeze Intelligence, and Breeze Agents, but that's just the beginning.
Absolutely. That's the really exciting part to me is, and it's kind of daunting because I feel like every time I log in, there's like a new beta. And now that because that happened to me, I'm like, I've been doing this for 10 years. Like I know all the stuff in HubSpot. And so I'm like, I can't believe that this happened. So now I'm like, what's the name? What are you guys calling it? And I really am diligent about making sure I know my names because I'm not going to get caught like that again.
Yeah, right.
But they're so cool.
Yeah, it is. And it's, I'm actually, we're getting ready to go on an African safari in a few weeks. And I forget who came up with this terrible saying. So I changed it from how do you eat an elephant to how do you eat a cow. They're a little smaller, but it's still 3,000 pounds of meat. But the question is, the answer of course is the same, right? One bite at a time.
One bite at a time.
So it is a beast, that we all have to figure out how to consume, over the next 90 days, 12 months, and ongoing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think my advice is just do it one bite at a time, but make sure, or it's a little bit like the marathon versus the sprint kind of analogy too, right? It's just make sure you keep putting one step in front of the other. Whatever you do, don't do nothing, but just figure out what is the next step you need to make or take, and then eventually you'll get there, and things will speed up, and you'll start to see patterns and trends and use cases.
I'm just curious from your client perspective, do you see a similar pattern in the kind of 90-day cycle or like when you're putting somebody through a RevOps, like a CRM setup, do you see a lot of the same kind of like issues happening in companies that you have to go through and solve, or is it everybody is quite different?
I mean, you mean with regards to AI or just in general?
Oh, no, I mean, just in general, just, a CRM implementation, someone's getting into HubSpot or something. And
yeah, no, I would say there are some fundamental differences. We work across manufacturing, professional services, and the professional services is primarily in the architecture, engineering, construction space, otherwise known as AEC. And then we work with large nonprofits and large franchises, and each of those, because they have a slightly different go-to-market and they use different terminology. Again, it's all this sort of vertical industry focused type stuff. But what we've also learned by going deep into each of these verticals, that they do have different challenges, right? So I mean, you mentioned the manufacturing example earlier. In manufacturing, supply chain is always a massive risk and a massive part of their business. Whereas in professional services, like a large, architecture or engineering firm with 500 to 1,000 people, they have very different challenges, and their challenges typically around, they over-index on relationships. So, you and I know we're also professional services businesses. Relationships is everything, but it's also, it can be you can do it far more smartly if you use processes and technology to help you figure out which relationships you should be focusing on first. So it doesn't matter if you
nailed it. That's exactly right, dude.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter if you're 15, 20, 200 or 2,000 people in a professional services firm. You're always going to have that challenge because it's all about the relationship. But really, it's about how do you maximize the calories that you have to put into the most valuable relationships to drive lifetime value versus just spreading your teams equally across all clients to maintain those relationships, when we know that the Pareto principle is the reality, where 20% of your clients are going to be bringing you 80% of the business. So to your question, it really depends on whether you're dealing with manufacturing or professional services, because their measurables are different, right? So their data, their KPIs are different. Ultimately, it's about revenue and profitability, but then how they measure on a daily, weekly, quarterly basis is very different. And we see that when we're consulting to them on revisiting their processes, making sure that they're measuring the correct data, so that we can implement the CRM in the way that actually works for them. It is quite different at the end of the day, but of course the process is similar.
Yeah. Gosh, Brendon, I want to be like you when I grow up.
Likewise, that's I always learn so much from you because you're such a smart.
That's why
guy.
Brendon. That's why we're buddies.
Yeah, exactly.
What else you got? What other good questions? Let's get weird. Get a deep one.
So, I mean, I know, like, for you and I, we're different to everybody else because, like, everything we've ever done in business has been like smooth sailing, and everything just goes up and to the right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Continue.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. So, but one of the common things I think, when you speak to any business owner or business leader who's been around for a while, one of the things that seems to come up is that the biggest times of growth that we've had as individuals, as well as in our businesses, have been when we've been through the hardest situations in a business type situation. Do you have any examples of, like, some really hard ones that you've been through that you would absolutely do again because it was absolutely worth it in the end?
Well, all the big challenges that we've gone through in the company, as just looking at from an operations perspective to an owner perspective to just a friend of so many people that I've hired who are not here anymore from, like, whatever reason, a fault of my lack of leadership, a fault of the way that we ran the company. There's a lot of learning processes. And so through all of the, like, really challenging, difficult moments of my career, all of them have been 100% worth it. There are always situations that have not the best outcomes, but the amount of things that I have learned from those that course corrected us as a company, big or small, have been, like, sometimes life-changing. And I think even, like,
life-changing in a good way. Yeah.
In a good way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe not always, like, sometimes not in the best of ways. Like, one of the rules I have is, like, don't ever hire your best friend. I'm never doing that again. Not that I hired a best friend, but, like, I've had really close people that I've become close with. And the way that I used to, like, lead my company 15 years ago compared to the way that I do it now is vastly different. And just the learning curve of that has been huge. But my answer here is probably a little bit more on, like, a personality level as opposed to, like, a technology level. But we could talk about the technology side too. I'd have to dig and think of, like, a specific example.
Well, I mean, yeah, on the technology side, I mean, whether it's something that you've, an implementation that you've done internally, or an implementation that you've done, for a client, like the example that I've often given. So prior to us jumping onto HubSpot in 2014, so in 2013, we bought Salesforce.
Oh, Brendon.
Which, again, in hindsight, is like, how stupid could we have been to have made that
You made
decision?
the decision that you had with the right information that was in front of you at the time.
Right. And we were dealing with really smart, really good salespeople who knew how to sell us something that they knew we absolutely could do nothing with, unless we paid another $25,000 to do the implementation piece, which they had not told us about before when they sold us the software. But anyway, so that was a really bad experience. But again, we learned from it. And a year later, when HubSpot came along, we were like, oh my gosh, this is a whole different experience, and it's so much better. But we wouldn't have we wouldn't have been able to make that comparison had we not been through the bad experience the year before.
Yeah, that's a great example.
What examples do you have of implementations?
Yeah. Okay, here's a good one. I don't know if you have if your listeners are primarily your customers or if they're like prospects. I'll give you a little boost here, Brendon, because this will help you out for your prospects listening. I won't say what company it was because I'm not into throwing people under the bus. I'll tell you later. You text me. We've gone through 2 project management tool revamps in our company in the last couple of years.
Only 2?
Only 2. We're pretty good at staying on it for a while until it just really pisses me off and I'm over it. But the one prior to the one we're using now, I will never buy a tool again as a business owner that we have to go through it. Like if it's going to be a pretty intensive, like I know this is good, like this is going to change my company if I do this wrong. Like it's really bad, right? Like project management is how we're organizing our company and our operations. And so I just bought the onboarding that came with the product, and I had that product work with my team to go through onboarding and to like help guide us through setting it up. Worst decision ever. If I could go back and do that again, I would have paid, the $20K or whatever that the partners of that company were doing, because the amount of knowledge that group had that I just was too stingy and didn't want to spend the money on, if I'm being honest, was probably enough to have saved my butt and kept us on that product for a long time to run our company. But instead, we decided to, we're going to save money. We're going to run with this company's like onboarding. The person that did the onboarding was very nice, but I'm pretty sure she was like right out of college. And so like, how are you consulting me on how my business should be operating? Doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, we didn't really set it up right. We spent a massive amount of time going through this process. Simple things like I should be able to just see how much time my staff are spending collectively on projects. And it was all over the place. And I'm like, this is like a nightmare now to clean this up. And I don't want to do it, but now it's my problem because I'm running the company. So, the moral of that story is be mindful about, like, for me that I took away is like, John, you have to be mindful about choosing a new product or a new thing that you're going to really invest in.
Mm-hmm.
And don't take it lightly that there's people who have done this for a living that know things that are like, just don't do it this way or avoid this. And just, there's so much comfort in that. So that was a big one for me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good one. And I mean, you raised so many good questions, that come out of that. I mean, one of course is change management, which I don't know about you, but we've as we've sort of gone up market in the last 5 years, when people started talking to me about having to include change management in our implementations, 6 years ago, I'm like, change management is for like the Fortune 500 and whatever. Our clients aren't going to want to do change management. But the reality, of course, is if you're implementing a massive system, it's going to require change, and that change needs to be managed. And now change management is like one of our differentiators. But the other thing that you touched on was, and this is actually something that I've been debating publicly for the last couple of weeks. So, one of the other amazing announcements that HubSpot made last month was their new slogan, easy, fast, and unified. It's awesome. And as I know you're a really smart, marketing and sales mind. It's a very, very, powerful slogan.
Mm-hmm.
But what you just referred to now, giving the example of doing the software companies, very low level El Cheapo onboarding,
Mm-hmm.
because because that was only $3,000 versus the $20,000 you could have done it with if you had actually gone with one of their professional services partners. I think when people are buying technology, again, this is one of the oldest mistakes in the book, right? Shiny object syndrome. The technology is not going to solve any other issues that you have in the business. The technology is just going to make your business, it's going to augment or accelerate whatever you're doing, whether it's good or bad, right? But those services partners, again, to give us both a plug, and anyone who is in services supporting software implementations, which of course is in pretty much every ecosystem, those companies like ours exist for a reason, and that is so that you can have someone who's experienced implementing and customizing that technology for your specific business, versus just unless you really have a very strong team who's familiar with the software and familiar with all the other software that has to be integrated with that software internally. But otherwise, you get what you pay for. And if you go with the cheap option, it's often turns out it's not the cheap option.
Yeah, you definitely get what you pay for. But also, really important thing to think through, like, here's my checklist of what you should do if you are going to work with an implementation partner for any kind of product. You have to vet all of them. Personally, I hate it when clients ask me to speak to another client, or when a prospect asks me to speak to another client. I do it, but at some point I've asked these people so many times, will you talk to another client? They get it. I'll throw you a $50 gift card. Come on, do another one for me. But I can't say I would do the same thing. At this point, if I'm going to trust somebody to help me implement something, I want to vet the crap out of them, and I want to vet them compared to somebody else. So you got to make a score sheet of what you're looking for. The other thing that I would want to do, I want to speak to the person who I'm going to work with on a daily basis. That's a big one, because so often you have a nice conversation and you're schmoozing with the person. The salesperson's nice, and the person that's your strategist is nice, but that's not who you get to talk to after you sign the contract. So you want to clear those up. I don't even know how many, in the HubSpot ecosystem, there's thousands and thousands of partners, and they come and go all the time. And a lot of them have a large quota in order to stay where they're at. And so they say anything to sell a deal. So there is definitely some sketchy stuff that happens. We end up, maybe I shouldn't say don't do that, because that's a big part of my business today, is fixing things that some of these other partners have done, and they hire me afterwards, which is fine. It's cool with me. But
yeah, in fact, I end up talking about that more than I'd like to on the show too. Is it sounds like your team and our team are sort of on that list of fixers that gets called in when, whether it was a failed implementation by another partner, or someone tried to do a self implementation and they should not have done that. So that's, so I end up thinking and saying aloud, often just to myself a lot, just do it right the first time. But of course, we all know that if we were all doing that, then we wouldn't be human, right?
I had somebody a couple of years ago. Actually, we hit it off great. I talked to several people in their company. It was great process. We did a lot of strategy together and just kind of pre-sale. And they were like, "Hey, I got to be honest. The other agency we were speaking with was a lot cheaper, and it's not just me making the decision. We've got to go in another direction, but thank you." And so in the moment I was really pissed, but then I was like, "Oh, I totally understand. It happens, whatever." That was probably 2 years ago. They're now a client of ours because didn't work. Things that they were promised weren't correct. And so I got on a call with them when they reached out, like, "Hey, can we catch up?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we can catch up. Sure." And so I got on the Zoom meeting, and they wouldn't look me in the eye, and they were like, "Don't say it. I know. We should have gone with you. Let's move past it." And I was like, "Hey, look, forgiveness is free here. Let's go. Let's talk about it."
We're actually in the middle of one of those right now, where there are two other partners who are in the mix. We don't know who they are. So hopefully you don't offer free assessments. But if you do, maybe you're one of them.
Whatever Brendon's offering, 10%, come to me. I got you. Just here's my email.
But and we're obviously working together with a HubSpot rep. But the prospect is saying, "Oh, we'd love to work with Dynamico on this, but the other two partners have offered to do the first piece, which is an assessment of their current tech stack. They've offered to do that for free." And we're like, "Okay, well, we're not, yeah, we're not able to do that for free. We have really good, smart people that we need to pay. So here's this is what it'll cost if you do it with us. And however, if you do it with us, we'll work that the cost of that back into whatever we do post, if there's anything done after the assessment. And whether they come and work with us or not doesn't really matter, because we're just doing what we know we have to do in order to provide the best value, even though they're not currently seeing the value proposition, because they're seeing free versus paid. And so hopefully they don't make the same mistake you did when you bought that.
What are you calling me out for? Come on. My stories are my stories. You don't get to have them your stories now.
We've all made the same mistakes, right?
Nightmare. I thought I was past it and you brought it back up.
John, so to close things out here, so we're deep into Q4 now. What advice would you have for the folks listening with anything regarding technology, data, which today also just equals AI, but let's just keep it simple. Data, technology, implementations. What advice would you leave folks with?
Ooh, great question. So number one, anything you're planning on doing in Q1 should already be in discussion right now. Should already be like planning. So execution of January is like October's, you're in workshops and strategizing for it right now. Too often I see people like, oh, we're going to do like a whole new website in January. So that's when they go and start talking to an agency. And I'm like, look, baby, we should be having this conversation in August. What are we doing now? Right. And so definitely don't sleep on the planning, because it's the worst if you do. And then now you're automatically starting the year off behind. And that's not what you want. That's a big one. Planning ahead. Number two would be technology wise. I would approach any technology decision with somebody who knows what they're doing from a strategic standpoint, and go through an exercise. Even if you just need someone to guide you, just go through an exercise where you're not talking about tools whatsoever. You have to remove 100% of the tools out of like what your business needs to be doing. And so if you completely move it platform agnostic, let's just pretend there's nothing here, but we're going to just magically have this perfect thing appear. Map everything out that you need that way, and then go and assess what are the best tools that are going to fix my solution. You'll find that you'll cut out so much money from your P&L statements if you can kill a bunch of software that you're paying for you don't need. I probably could go through any of my client companies and find tons of like $100 a month, $50 a month, like all these different line items that they've signed up for that they don't probably even realize they have. You've got to take stock in that too, but definitely go through and build out a strategy or a flow or just an understanding of everything that you'd like to see happen without thinking about the platform, and then go fix from a execution standpoint, put the right tools in place, remove the tools that don't need to be there.
That's really good advice. And I hate to say it, I mean, you're not the first person that we've had on the show who's suggested that, but hopefully that'll, for the folks who've heard other episodes where this has been talked about in a similar but different way, which is essentially map out manually what it is that you need to happen, which is essentially why we talk about process a lot, because all the technology is ultimately doing is it's helping you more effectively execute on your processes, and it's obviously keeping all the data that runs through the processes between marketing, sales, and service, and if you're integrating with an ERP or whatever, it's the flow of data. But you have to be able to your point, you have to be able to map it out all on a sheet of paper or whatever you want to use manually before you start diving into what technology we're going to use.
Absolutely. Yep.
I think that was really good advice, John.
The only other thing I would add to that would be like, once you map out where you want to, like what that dream scenario looks like, to start phasing it in. And you can go through and look at nice to haves and need to haves and prioritizing those. And so
I hate that exercise, but it's so powerful.
Yeah. And nobody likes doing it. Like one of the pushbacks that we have when we do website work or any kind of like strategic stuff, nobody wants to pay for discovery research, like that stuff. And I used to be a lot more lenient and be like, okay, you understand your positioning of your product. Okay. But then, when we start to actually execute on things and stuff doesn't work, I'm like, and then they get mad at me about it. I'm like, guys, why don't we do the exercise I recommended from the start? And you didn't want to pay for it. Yeah. So don't discount the things that feel not good. That was why I didn't hire the other companies. I just bought the cheap onboarding. The story I was telling earlier was like, I can figure all that. I have no tools. I can figure tools out.
Yeah. If you had endless amount of time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Which of course is something we didn't even talk about, but is something that we all are challenged with, right? It's just because you can do something doesn't mean you're going to. And if you don't, then what happens, kind of thing,